Pull readers into immersive universes where magic, power, loyalty, and identity collide, where the choices her characters make carry lasting consequences. Leigh first captured global attention with her captivating series beginning with Shadow and Bone. That world expanded through Six of Crows and Crooked Kingdom, novels that are celebrated for intricate plots, morally complex characters, and bold imagination. Her work now reaches an even wider audience through her hit Netflix series titled Shadow and Bone. Leigh continues to push creative boundaries in Ninth House and Hellbent, where she blends mystery, danger, and the supernatural in contemporary settings, creating stories that are as thrilling as they are thought-provoking. Across every genre, Leigh writes with intelligence, heart, and a deep understanding of power and resilience. Her work invites readers to question who they trust, what they fear, and how far they will go to protect the people and the worlds that they love. Today, Leigh joins us to share her latest work and her extraordinary creative journey. Please join me in welcoming the brilliant Leigh Bardugo and Peter Biello.
Leigh Bardugo, thank you so much for coming to Savannah for this. This is
Peter,
wonderful.
thank you for interviewing me. And I need to apologize, I'm getting over a cold, but I kind of like it. It's made my voice very NPR, actually.
Well, Savannah's been on your list of places to visit for a long time.
Yes. I mean, I'm one of those people who read Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil like 20 years ago and completely fell in love with the idea of getting to visit. And if you love history and architecture, this is kind of the place to be.
Certainly. Well, great to have you here, however brief. It's lovely to have you here to talk about The Familiar and your other books. We'll spend a lot of time talking about The Familiar, but of course, especially during the Q&A session later, anything is fair game. So yeah, let's start with The Familiar. And I wanted to ask you about your personal family history that partially inspired this book.
Yeah, so my family is Russian and Lithuanian on one side and Spanish and Moroccan on the other side. And I knew that we had been cast out in 1492, big year, especially for Spain. And that was when they basically said to their Jewish population, you can convert, you can leave, or you can die. And my family chose to leave, but we know there were people who remained. And those branches of the family tree kind of got lopped off. So this book was a way to understand that history and to kind of draw those branches back in.
So a lot of research then.
Yes, a huge amount of research. And I would sometimes wake up in a cold sweat imagining like a terrible review in the New York Times, somebody being like, this poser thinks you can write historical fiction. But for me it was, I knew, the thing about writing a novel is, you have to love what you're researching because you're going to live with it for a couple of years at least. And I loved the research for this, and I did hire a research assistant, and then I did hire a historian who specialized in late 16th century Madrid to kind of give me the most vicious read he could, and he did. And he did catch some things that I didn't catch, but I also educated him on some stuff.
Okay, yeah. What did he catch to you?
So no carrots and no doorbells. Okay. Now, obviously, I didn't think there was a Ring doorbell. But how many movies have you seen where somebody comes, they ring the bell outside?
I would have believed it.
Yeah, no doorbells in late 16th century Madrid, and no carrots, so that became cabbage. But, and I kind of love those little things. But then there's sort of an interesting moment. There's a character called the Prince of Olives, and people kind of look down on him because he comes from a farming family. And he said, well, there really weren't wealthy farming families. There were lords and ladies, and then there were servants and serfs, essentially. And I said, well, it doesn't make sense to that. He said, look, but there's also exceptions. Historians deal in generalities, but you can deal in an exception. So he was vicious, but he was also kind.
Yeah. Well, I loved in The Familiar attention to detail, like the kinds of foods or the things that characters would be drinking, for example. Like there was a beverage that was a mixture of wine and lemonade that stood out to me because I'd never heard of that before.
They still serve it.
And I trusted that it was an authentic thing because I was just so caught up in the sort of narrative intelligence. Like, I trust this narrator to tell me what's going on here.
Okay.
So I wanted to ask about Lucia. She is, for those who haven't read, there will be no spoilers. This is just the premise. She works little bits of magic. She can put shattered bits of glass back together. She can unburn some burned bread. And that's the type of thing, and it progresses as she goes on. I was wondering what drew you to that kind of character with that kind of skill?
I mean, I've been writing about girls who have a special skill for many years. It's definitely one of my favorite tropes. I wanted to take with Lucia a young woman whose magic was entirely domestic. It was small, it was underestimated, and then put that magic into a much more competitive, violent atmosphere. I think the idea of small domestic magic is appealing to me because it is so much the purview of women in history, right? They live in the kitchens, they live in the bedroom, they're excluded from large portions of public life, military life, etc. So this was a way of taking that heroine and placing her in those situations. And her magic is based on refranes, which is the way that Ladino still survives in the world, is in these little phrases, the equivalent of like a stitch in time saves nine. But like, I grew up with my grandmother saying, "Quien no risica, no rostica," which means who doesn't laugh doesn't bloom, which is sort of a way of being like, would you please smile? And so I thought, okay, but what if it actually made something bloom? So to me, it was a way of using language in a fun way.
Well, that's a really fun element of the story, I think. Watching her grow roses out of nothing and grow obstacles for those who are chasing her. And her ambition.
Yeah.
I mean, that is a thread that goes throughout this whole novel. Not just her ambition, but the ambitions of others as well. But also, especially for the women in the story who have ambition, they're always kind of questioning what ambition means for their character. They question it themselves. Like, what does this mean about me? And that was something that seems so very, very carefully constructed on your part.
I think ambition is a tricky thing. I think we often look at it a little suspect, but it's also such a powerful driver. And for me, I often don't quite recognize the theme of the story until I'm about halfway through the book. And what I understood then was I was creating a character, a woman who could not stop her own ambition. And she knows that the more famous she gets, the more popular she gets, the more well-known she gets, the bigger the target will be on her back. But she wants it. That doesn't stop her from wanting those things, from wanting power, from wanting influence. And I think that that's something that a lot of people, and maybe women in particular, can sympathize with. The more visible you become, the more people are going to take shots at you. Now, ideally not burn you at the stake, as in the Inquisition, but metaphorically, you could end up being burned at the stake. And so that, for me, was a story I didn't quite realize I was telling until I was deep into the book. But then there's somebody like Valentina, for whom, her ambition is really love. It's really, she thinks it's social standing, but really she's just looking for somebody to see her and like her and want to spend time with her, which I think is also a very human thing.
Yeah, and the relationship between those two women in particular, right? I mean, Valentina employs Lucia, and she's awful to her at the beginning. They do not seem to have a lot in common, but over the course of the book, you realize both these women have great ambition and great longing for love.
Yeah, I think Valentina was sort of there's always a character in my books who surprises me, they begin kind of as an archetype. So in Ninth House, it would be Dawes. Dawes starts out as the research assistant and so forth, but then she has this tremendous role to play in the story. And in The Familiar, it's very much Valentina, who started out as kind of the wicked stepmother character. Right, like she's mean and she's and vain and all of these things. But when I started writing her, if you're going to live with a character, then you're going to discover things about that character you didn't expect. And she ended up kind of being like a secret MVP of that story. And I've been surprised at how many people found her story compelling, because I think her loneliness is something that's pretty universal.
Yeah, her wants were completely understandable right from the get-go. She wanted a few more dresses and she wanted her husband to love her. And who can't sympathize with that?
I mean, I'm glad you can relate. That's good to know.
We understand what she's going through. You mentioned something about not knowing the theme until about halfway through.
Yeah.
What did you think you were writing before you reached that moment? Like, what theme did you think you were working with?
I mean, I'm a plot person, right? Like my books almost always begin with a hook, and then with me sort of figuring out what the major plot beats are of the story. And the things I have to know those things going in. So with Six of Crows, I was like, I'm gonna write a romp. I'm gonna write a fantasy romp. It's gonna be so much fun. And then I started writing about a group of criminals, thugs and thieves. Well, what are the social forces that create those criminals? And if you're going to write honestly about a thing, then you have to dive pretty deep into it. And all of a sudden, I'm writing Kaz's backstory and everything has changed. And it's a little bit less of a romp. And that was true with The Familiar too. Okay, I'm gonna write a story about the Inquisition. Heavy. Where am I gonna place this story? Who is going to be my heroine for this story? But I didn't really understand the driving force of her ambition and the way that was going to animate the story until I was deep into it. So, I don't know, I think for me it's sort of plot and place almost come before I really understand my characters.
And once you have that theme in mind halfway through, does that sort of color the way the events go forward?
Yes, and I am a firm believer in revision, and that my books become the book that I want, the story I want to tell in revision, in iteration. And so I've learned to kind of trust my process in that way. Although I have had experiences like with my critique partners, a vital part of writing as well, where I will bring them a thing and they'll say, the plot is great, where are the emotions? And so that is in some ways the thing that I have to develop the most.
Huh, okay. I want to talk about Santander. Am I saying that correctly?
Santander.
Santander,
Yeah.
okay. The familiar, the man for whom this book is named. First, can I ask you to talk a little bit about the concept of the familiar and how it's used in fantasy writing?
Yeah, it was interesting. A lot of people thought it was going to be a vampire book. Did anybody think it was going to be a vampire book?
I pictured it in my brain as a kind of Nosferatu kind of, just because he's described as so pale with the long, skinny fingers.
I mean, interesting. Yes, that, but hot is what I would say. Well, first of all, I wanted to start out with somebody who was not, these are not people who feel instant physical attraction, right? Like, I'm not really interested in people who are sort of instant, two perfect people meet on the street, great. I've seen that story before. So I wanted him to begin as this sort of strange and sickly creature who is effectively brought to life by this woman. And somebody who has lost his taste for living, who has lived so long that he's disinterested in everything, and the idea that you could encounter something new is shocking to him. But the idea of familiars, I mean, they're in the Bible, and the idea of the witch's familiar long predates the idea of the vampire familiar. So that's where the idea for this came from. I will also say something that didn't make it into the book, which I discovered in my research, was during the Inquisition, you had this very strange situation where you have people doing very brutal things but not wanting to get their hands dirty. Go figure. And these folks, the priests who were in charge of the tribunals and so forth, they did not put people to death. You would be handed over to a civil authority. They also could not go into towns and do investigations. And the people who did do those things for them, who were the lay people who were doing this work for them, were called familiars.
So the Inquisition part came, and then the familiar part came afterwards as a wonderful way to put these things together. Regarding the hotness, because I had questions.
The title of my memoir.
Yeah, regarding the hotness by Leigh Bardugo. It wasn't something that I had to get over to read this book and to believe in the romance. It wasn't an obstacle for me, and I wondered if you wrote it in such a way so that it wouldn't be, or if you thought about how are readers going to come along with this? Because your first impression of this guy is like, he's very creepy.
Yeah.
Like, spooky creepy.
Yeah.
And then somehow...
You don't find that out?
I mean...
You do you, man.
So maybe that says more about me.
I'm saying, we can get into that.
because he starts that way, but then he modulates, and a little bit of color comes back to him, right? And he becomes alive again. He's changing physically as he becomes more capable of love, and I was wondering how you manage that transition.
I think I believe in the idea that the people we find attractive become more attractive in our eyes. And yes, there are the people you see who you're like, that is an objectively attractive person. Okay. but the people who we really feel compelled by, they get sexier, they get more beautiful, they get more charming the more you get to know them. And then there's the people who, like, you think they're going to be spectacular, and then the more time you spend with them, you're like, okay. So for me, this was an opportunity, because he doesn't find her physically appealing either, right? Like,
It's not part of it.
No, and so as they get to know each other, that desire begins to take shape between them. And to me, that was sort of a little bit of a challenge I was setting for myself. Because I love romance, and I always find it interesting. People have almost a sneer when they talk about romantic things and romance in novels, and yet most of us spend a big chunk of our lives looking for a partner, right? We're looking for companionship. We're looking for that. You know, how many people are on apps, or, you know, like, I guess people don't go to bars anymore, but you know what I mean. And that pursuit is a big part of being human for a lot of people. Not for everybody, but like I don't see why that wouldn't be a driving force in narrative. But I wanted to make it harder on myself, so I just made them be like, ew, initially.
I mean, I thought it was super charming on both their parts. Do you consider this under the umbrella of romantasy?
No.
No. Can you talk a little bit about what that would be? Like what is romance?
I don't exactly know. I think maybe you know it when you see it. I think of romance. I think all these categories we create for fiction are about the expectations of the reader. And I think if somebody is a big romantasy fan and they came to this book, they'd be like, if any of you have been reading me for a while, you know I love a slow burn. I just want to torture you for as long as possible. And Ninth House people are like, So for me, I don't think that would meet the expectations of most romantasy readers. And I think there's maybe, and I could be wrong about this because I don't actually know, but I think there's more of an expectation for more on-the-page sex and more explicit sex, and that's not what you're going to get from this book. This is much more like historical fiction with a little bit of fantasy mixed in. I think. I don't know. Please don't set fire to me on the internet.
Well, I mean, I think you've said this before to other interviewers, is that it's kind of, to some extent, a marketing category.
Yeah.
Like bookstores got to file it somewhere.
I think readers find things that they like and they're passionate about, and then publishers and booksellers put a label on it so they can say, go to this section of the bookstore. But there's always going to be blur there. And that was true for young adult, that's true for adult, that was true for all kinds of romance. They tried new adult for a while, which never kind of took hold. It's just a way of marketing books to readers. And again, I think the important thing is expectation. So I would never want somebody to be like, I think I'm going to get a nice, juicy romantasy read, and then be like, there's a lot of history here that I'm not really interested in. Like, or maybe they would be like, you know what, I didn't know that I wanted this history, and now I mean, like, this is the romantasy I wanted. But for writers, I think we write the story we want to write, and then we leave it to other people to kind of put whatever hashtags. Like, when I wrote Ninth House, dark academia was not a thing. I did not know that was a thing. And then people started, I thought it was horror. I thought it was dark fantasy. And then people were like, no, it's dark academia. And I was like, okay, I will go with that, that's fine. But it's not, I don't think most readers or writers necessarily see stories with those hard dividing lines.
Yeah, and I think, you said earlier that you are mostly a plot writer, but I mean, there's character development here too that kind of oversees everything, in my view. Like, you're writing stories about human people. They may have elements of magic, but it's still a relationship story.
Let me be really clear. Plot does not make an interesting book, right? Like, plot is a place to begin. It's the bones, it's the scaffolding for me. And I think it's the thing I was most intimidated by when I was starting out as a writer. It took me a very long time to figure out how to write a book. I wanted to be a novelist long before I became a novelist. And for me, the key to unlocking that was outlining and was understanding the beats of plot. So it's almost like a security blanket for me. But the truth is, all story is character. And we know that when we read. And actually, we know that you could go to a theme park, right? You're going to see characters in that ride. You're going to see, it's not just a plot. It's not just moving from A to B. That's choreography, okay? The characters are what give us any kind of investment. So I think it's just, for me, it's also the part that I enjoy discovering as I write. When I started writing Six of Crows, I did not know why Kaz wore his gloves. That was something I had to discover in the process, but it's also what kept the writing exciting for me, because those characters could keep surprising me and unfolding for me, even if I knew where the plot was going.
So you would plant things early in the narrative that you weren't even sure how you were going to use them yet.
100%. And then that's, again, I don't talk about my projects a lot when I'm working on them. You know, there are people who online and only respect who will be like, I wrote this today and I wrote this great quote today, and I can't do that. I need to keep it secret for a long time and to sort of let that seed germinate. And if it sees the light too soon, it's like it takes all the sauce and all the magic out of it. So for me, that's an important part of the process, is that kind of when the story just belongs to you and the characters just belong to you. I know the basic places that I'm going. I always know the way the story is going to end. That said, there have been characters who have steered the story so powerfully, then I have to go back and I rewrite the outline because, and a perfect example of that would be in my first trilogy, there's a character who initially is, Mal and Alina meet a privateer. Well, that privateer was Sturmhond, and he was supposed to die at the end of the second book. Spoiler, he does not, because I liked writing him so much that I was like, okay, the chicken lives. Nikolai gets to live, and then he ended up getting his own series. So, you have to, writing, I think, and you're a writer too, so if you disagree, let me know, we can fight, but I win. But when we're writing, the only goal is to maintain momentum, right? To get yourself to the finish line of that book. And we all learn different processes and tools that help us do that. The important thing is to stay flexible, so that if the story is telling you, I don't want to go here, I don't want to do this, you can respect that and pivot off of it.
There are so many different ways to describe exactly what you just described. I think I'm sure we have aspiring writers in the room here. You've probably heard it in a variety of different ways as well. I've heard it in the way of writers have to plant sort of gold coins along a trail, where they can't be spaced so far apart that you can't see the hint of the next one.
Yeah.
So you just got to keep following for that next gold coin.
I think too, for me, if something's not working, when you're working on this one chapter and you realize you've just been in it for days and you just have to leave it where it is, then I can move on to something else. Because I have a general sense of where I'm going, and that might then tell me what was wrong with that particular scene that I was working on.
Well, let me ask you, for the sake of the writing students in class, more detail on the outlining process for you.
Yes.
What does that look like? Are you doing the ragtag pyramid all the way up from the rising action climax to denouement? How does it look to you?
I have a page, and I have 9 beats on that page, 9 big moments or sequences that are happening in that book. Act 3 is 3, Act 2 is 6. In the middle of that Act 2 is the giant midpoint turnaround. That's when something big happens that changes everything for the characters and for the audience. And I have a general sense of what happens at the very end of the book. That for me is enough. But what I like to say is now I have a whole book. It's a 1-page book, but I have a whole book sitting in front of me, and that is how that works. And then I go into Scrivener, which is I don't know what to call it,
it's a writing
program.
Right?
Yeah.
Not quite word,
but you can keep, Scrivener was the way I first started using it for Six of Crows, and I don't think I could have written that book without it, because I could color code my POVs, I could move scenes around in the outline. When I was revising, I could move around with a great deal of agility that just a regular word processing program doesn't provide. But I'll go in and I'll start breaking out, okay, here are the scenes that I think are going to happen, in each of these sections. And my zero draft, the draft that no one will see, that is where I'm sort of kicking the tires of the story to tell me what am I missing, what am I not understanding. That zero draft is me telling myself everything I know about the story. I'm telling the story just to myself to figure it out. I have lots of questions, I have a lot of false starts, I'll have multiple versions of things. I could go this way, I could go that way. But it's before you really invest, right? This is where you're putting up the walls and you're figuring out, you're not decorating and putting nice throw pillows until you've figured out how to keep everything standing. And that, especially now that I have to write on fairly challenging deadlines, has been a good sort of base for me.
So is that the process that you were using from your first novel onward?
Yeah, I use it for everything. I will say that with my adult work, there's a kind of density to the world building and the prose and sometimes the plots where I need to, it used to be I'd write a zero draft, I would charge all the way through. Now I will write the first act, I'll go back and revise, flesh it out as much as possible, figure out where the problems lie. Then I'll get to the midpoint, go back and I'll revise. Usually I'll send that to my editor, see, am I on the right track here? And that I write sort of more in stages than that sort of first big rough draft. But I still always start with those 9, is that 9, 3, 6? No, 12. 12 beats, not 9. I was a liberal arts major, the math is really bad. yeah, so I'll start with that 12B page, and that is always the basis. Not for short fiction, though.
Short fiction, what do you do?
I just tell myself the story, sit in my bathtub, and I tell myself the story, and if it gets too long, if it starts getting into novella territory, then I will go back and I will break it, but, you know.
Well, what about the difference between, not necessarily with respect to outlining, but with respect to just writing YA fiction versus adult fiction? Because you've made that transition. How's it feel? I mean, is it more challenging? Is it what's your approach?
I mean, again, I think for the writer, it's not a radically different process. With the adult books, that's when I started doing that. I've got to go back and revise. I've got to go back and revise. I've got to go back and revise, and to just keep a grasp on what I'm doing. And that's partially because all of my young adult work has been in the Grishaverse, and I know the Grishaverse so well now that it's like, you know, I'm the best tour guide, and I know where everything is, and those characters are incredibly familiar to me. I know how the magic works. With new things like the familiar, like with Ninth House, that means that there's a lot more trial and error, and that means that I need to work on it a little bit differently. And I think too, you know, I can go places in the adult fiction. I'm working on a horror right now that goes some very dark places, and that I think would have been too much of a shock to the system for my younger readers, and doesn't really belong in those spaces. And I like having that ability to say, here's the wall, and if this is the kind of stuff that makes you uncomfortable, you don't have to worry about it being on this side of the wall.
So it's not necessarily a question of like, oh, you're free to do more in an adult novel. It's just there's different territory that you can mine more.
Yeah, I think that there are darker places you can go. And I will say this too, I think the ambitions of my adult characters are slightly different from my YA characters. I think in YA we have a sense of, you know, you're gonna get to the big battle scene, or you're gonna get to the revolution, or you're gonna get to the prom, or whatever is that sort of big thing at the end of the book. And there are some ideas about what the future might hold, but you're not entirely sure. Whereas I think my adult characters are grappling with the kind of things that we grapple with as we get older, which is, how do I make a place in the world for myself, for the people that I love? How do I continue on day to day and week by week? How do I pay my mortgage, etc.? Like, those are the more fundamental questions of those kind of long-term goals for the adult characters.
And I've never written or published YA, so you tell me, but it seems like the YA pace of writing is a lot faster, right? Because your audience is aging rapidly, and for adults it might be slower.
That's why I get very peevish when people are rude to YA and romance authors, because we generate fiction so quickly. We are making our deadlines, and so that's not a small thing to be able to do. And I feel like I was trained in the YA trenches. That said, again, apologies to the Ninth House fans, I do take a lot more time between, you know, when I entered the adult publishing world and they said, oh yeah, you can release a sequel a few years later, I was like, what? What? And then people got angry at me. But yes, like there's a different schedule, there's a different point of pressure, and honestly, I think like that. I think YA has changed a lot, though. Like, I almost feel like I feel like the YA I knew was very different from the YA that exists now, and I don't quite feel like I'm an authority on it anymore.
Well, how's it different?
I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think that there's. Look, I think the reality is that a lot of the readers who were passionate about YA are now people who are passionate about romantasy and romance, and I think that and I think we've seen that audience shrink a little bit. And so if you look at the kind of numbers that a book that's selling well in YA has versus a book that's selling well in adult, they're quite different. And that's the nature of the market, it's the nature of publishing. I've been very lucky to have the career that I've had, but I think I've always been conscious of the fact that you enjoy your success while you can, and you understand that, you know, the young folk will come up, and there will be new kings and queens, and that's okay too.
In a few minutes, we'll open up to your questions. So if you've got a question you'd like to ask, a volunteer from the book festival will come to you with a microphone. So if you raise your hand when the time comes, they'll come to you, and we'll bring you into the conversation. It'll be a lot of fun. A few more questions for you, though, because I wanted to ask you about a project that's even newer than The Familiar, The Invisible Brain.
Yes.
It's a children's book. It's got incredible artwork. It's got a wonderful way of engaging on the theme of grief. Can you talk a little bit about this project?
Yeah, so I had wanted to write a picture book that grappled with grief for a long time, and I talked to my agent about this, and I brought her a lot of very somber, very serious, very poetic ideas, and she was like, that's great, not a picture book. And then my friend John Picasso, this incredible artist who I met years ago when I was just a fan of his and before I had ever gotten published, and we had stayed in touch, he came to me and he said, I think we should write a book together. And I was like, oh no. I don't want to do that. Because people tell me they want to write a book with me all the time. I had a doctor who was literally hooked up to an IV, and he was like, I have a great idea for a book. And I was like, terrific, I think I'm dying. He was like, but. And so I had people pitch me all the time, and I thought, how are we going to stay friends? And then he said, it's the Wizard of Oz set in a graveyard. And I was like, okay, John, tell me more. And we sat down and we talked about it. And John originally saw it as a girl kind of who was afraid of death and had to get over her fear of death. And I wanted to sort of take that and pivot it to a girl who was isolated by her grief. And for me, it was a way of, I was raised by my grandfather, and so it's the story of Kala losing her grandfather, and they were reading a book together, and how are you going to finish that story when that person isn't there to finish the story with you? And we hope that this book will be a little bit of a touchstone, a way of opening conversation for parents, for kids, maybe for friends. Grief can be very isolating, it can be very quiet, and here's a way of having a different conversation about it. So that was the goal of the book, and John really poured all of his heart and soul and culture into the art, and we're proud of it, yeah.
Yeah, it's such a sweet story, and it makes the scary not so scary.
I hope so.
There are horsemen that appear, and they could be kind of scary, but they make themselves, no pun intended, familiar to her. And it's just sweet. It's just really sweet.
Thank you.
So,
I have another picture book coming called Better Pets. It is just about cute animals, so that one's a little bit easier to get your hands on.
Really?
Yeah, it's about rescue pets, because I have a rescue dog who is a lot. And yeah, it's people are going to be very confused by it. It's the least goth book that's ever been created.
They wouldn't quite know it was by you?
The writing is by me, the art is by Liz Climo, who is amazing. She's so fantastic, and her work is adorable. It's just so adorable, and everything is pastel, and I'm having an identity crisis, but I'm very excited.
So you're a dog person?
I am a dog person, a cat person, horse, turtle, llama. I love all animals, except sharks. They terrify me.
Well, tell us about this, what you can anyway, about this horror novel. The next one's coming.
The next project I can't say very much about, but it is horror, and it will actually involve a bunch of authors. And we have an absolutely insane lineup of authors for this. And it has actually been incredibly intimidating for me because these are people I admire wildly, and so now I'm like working with them and doing editorial with them, and I can't wait to. I don't know when we're going to announce this thing, but it is a weird beast. It is very different from anything I've done before, and I'm enjoying the process.
Well, without me asking you too much about what it's about, how's the collaboration? Is that somewhat new for you to collaborate in this way?
I mean, yes and no. So, okay, I can tell you this. It's set in California. It's a little noir. It's a lot horror. There's a lot of history in it. And the way we've built it is I'm writing the first novella, and then we're going to have novellas from these individual authors that take this location, this place, this haunted place, and they do their own thing with it. And there are all kinds of threads that connect all of the characters together. And this is the thing, like when I was working on A Darker Shore, which is the Six of Crows Letters project that's coming out, I was very much like, why did I not just write a Christmas novella? Like, people would have been so happy. And instead I was like, I'm gonna make a puzzle, and it's gonna be incredibly complicated, and it's gonna be impossible to publish, yay. And so but I like to make make a challenge, and this horror project is absolutely a crazy puzzle again, because apparently that's what I like in my fiction.
Well, I'm excited to see this one come out.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's open it up to you. Who has a question?
I can't see you.
I can't see you very well, but I don't know if I need to. Lights are coming up.
Yay!
Okay.
Hi!
Who's got a microphone? There seems to be one over there. Let's maybe... Oh, you've got one. There you go. Hi.
Yeah.
Tell us your name and where you're from first.
Hello, my name is Alira. I'm from Dallas, Texas, originally. I got into your stuff from Six of Crows, which my question concerns Six of Crows. You have a cast of 6 characters, so how do you go about writing such different voices and personalities for all of those characters without them all sounding similar?
Are you a writer?
Yeah.
Yeah, all right. Lock the doors. We're going to eliminate the competition. Okay, so here's the thing, revision, right? In the early drafts, some of those characters are going to sound very similar. And as you revise, you're going to really pay attention to things like their education, where they come from, the kind of metaphors they use, the kind of sense of humor that they have. And then, as you progress through and you start to get to those later drafts, you're going to read that draft out loud, okay? And you're going to discover, as you read those POVs, there are going to be moments when that voice really locks in, and you're going to hear it in your own voice, because you're going to start really leaning into that character when you're reading it out loud. And those little moments are going to become the way that you always calibrate back to that moment again and again. And the example I always use is Nina. In the first draft of Six of Crows, she was kind of boring. She was really nice. She was really dumb. And then I was writing this scene with her and Kaz, and there was a moment where she kind of toes off her slippers, and he says to her, "You have crumbs in your cleavage." And she says, "I don't care." And that was when Nina locked in for me. So you can find those moments, but just don't get overwhelmed. It's going to come in that iteration, in that revision. Doesn't all happen at once.
Yeah, okay, thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Hi, my name is, sorry, I'm over here in the middle.
Hi.
Hi, hi, my name is Juliana, I'm from Southborough, Mass. My question also regards the Grishaverse. Where we left off in Rule of Wolves with crumbs to another adventure, do you have any plans to...
If you've read this title of this book is so hard to say, Rule of Wolves, that I did leave the door open at the end of that. And when I wrote that book, I intended to write a third Six of Crows. This was before the show came out, and something sort of happened when that happened, where things got really exciting, but they also got really noisy. And I didn't feel able to kind of approach that world in the same sort of, I talked about secrecy and having it all to yourself. I think there may come a time when I'm ready to revisit it. And I will say that when I wrote A Darker Shore, this little letters project, it's just a short story, and we put a lot of art in it and a lot of fun in it, but I loved being back with those characters. Their voices are so loud in my head, and it was really joyful. So I think, down the road maybe, I just don't know when.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hello, I'm Akin, and I wanted to know if you have any tips for young writers who are in the trenches of the traditional publishing, the entire publishing industry. And
Where are you right now?
Trying to get an agent.
Okay. Here's the thing. The business is very tough. It's always been tough, but it's gotten tougher. Okay, and I don't know if right now, if I was heading out with my first novel, if I would get snapped up. And I think it's really important to remember a few things. One, when you are on submission or querying, when you're with an agent, or then when you sign an agent, which an agent will absolutely sign you, it will happen. We're going to make that happen, okay? Yes! All right? I did this at another event and it worked, so just saying. But when that happens, then you have to go on submission to editors, right? And then once you publish your book, then you start reading Goodreads reviews. Don't read Goodreads reviews.
I've been told that many times.
I know. So all of those things, those are moments where you need to be working on other things. Okay? The only tonic for this fear, this anxiety, And rejection, if it comes, is to be working on something else, because you don't just have one story in you, you have countless stories in you. And it's easy to forget that, right? When we've poured our heart into something, we want people to see how valuable it is. And here's the beautiful thing. When you do sign with an agent, the first thing they will ask you is, what else have you got? And you will have those other projects, right? So that, in a way, that's going to put you ahead of the game when you finally get your foot in the door. I know it is hard, but the only way you fail is if you stop. So you must not stop.
Thank you so much.
Hello, my name is Jax. I come from a journalism background, so if you're willing, I'd like to hear a little bit more about your research process and how you go about that, especially with you hiring a research assistant on this book.
Sure. So for me, research is sort of my favorite thing. It's something I learned about myself is that if I'm stuck in a draft, the best thing I can do is to go get into the research. And I have, maybe you want to address this too, as you are a journalist. And
Good to see you.
Okay. But for me, I think there's kind of two types of research. There's wide net, right? And that's when I'm just sort of getting a feel for a thing. So for me, with The Familiar, that was, I am going to get a bunch of books, history, cultural history, political history, and I'm going to dive into this, and I'm going to figure out what the movements in this story, what are the big forces that are going to be at work in this story. And for me, that was also about figuring out where the Inquisition lasted over 300 years. So where in the Inquisition would it be most exciting for me to set this story? And that's sort of my favorite kind of research, because I'm looking for the things that excite me, because my hope is the things that interest me will be the things that interest readers as well. Then you get into the really tough stuff. Material culture, what people wore, what they ate, how they mourned. And that's much more challenging. For me, I speak Spanish roughly, but I could not read historical documents in Spanish. And so that was where my research assistant came in. I would give him lists of questions, he would bring back answers, and then I would go and excavate the sources that he had brought me. Or I would say, can you get me an answer on these very specific things? And that also changes the shape of the story and the writing. And that's been true for me really from the start. When I wrote Shadow and Bone, my main characters in that series, Mel and Alina, were going to have parents, because I thought everybody does orphans. Everybody does orphans in fantasy. They're going to have parents. And then I read these stories of these Russian noblemen who came back from the Napoleonic Wars and who started, they converted their dashas in their country estates into orphanages and homes for war widows, and they educated their serfs and they freed their serfs, and I thought, oh, this is too good. I'm gonna put these kids in an orphanage, and that's the way parents die in fantasy. It's very tragic. But yeah, so there's sort of that wide net, which is fun, and then there's specifics where you're just hunting for an answer, and it can be absolutely excruciating. But for me, the trick is getting back to the draft, because that's the thing too. We can hide in research the same way we can hide in world building and language building and character histories. That draft is going to show you the weak spots, the soft spots. So you set a time period that you're going to research, and then make yourself work on that draft.
Follow-up question on the research part.
Yes.
How much of your research involves contacting and having conversations with experts about the thing you're researching, and how much of it is simply diving into the correct written materials that will educate you on the subject?
For me, it begins heavily in the books, because if I'm going to take somebody's time, I want to be able to come to them and say, here are my specific questions, and can we work together on finding answers? Or sometimes, I'm very lucky to have a lot of friends who are much smarter than me, and so I recently reached out to a friend who's a doctor and said, I need this particular kind of illness, can you help me find it? And she initially thought it was something historical and was like, let me tell you about diphtheria. And I was like, no. Yeah, get a wide network of friends is what I would say, but also I think I like to prepare heavily before I get into those individual conversations. But some of the best and most interesting stuff I've come across has been in accessing particular people, and I can tell you even, I actually have this on video I had my cell phone out when I was working on Hellbent. I had run into a problem with the plot, and this wonderful woman, Camilla Zoraida Tesler, Tesler, was leading me around the library. She's from Manuscripts and Archives, and she took me to introduce me to the head librarian, and the librarian said, "Have you seen The Secret Door?" And I was like, "Excuse me?" And it's literally like she solved all of the problems in this book for me in that moment. It was incredible.
So librarians too.
Librarians, A+.
Yeah. Because I imagine like when you are New York Times bestselling author, hey, I need your advice, people answer the phone. If you haven't published anything yet, I think, maybe I'm wrong, but people will still answer the phone. More people are pretty generous with their time so long as you are flexible. Do you think?
I think if you approach with some humility and kindness and with an understanding that you are asking for somebody's time and that you have specific questions, I think a lot of people want to talk about the things they're passionate about. Like, I think that most people, especially when you get into the more arcane and specific things, you call somebody up and you say, "Hey, you wrote this incredible book about death and dying in Madrid." And they're like, "You read it? I sold 5 copies." So I actually had this guy who did, Pinnell, who did the architecture guide to Yale and New Haven, was like, "I'm in your acknowledgements." And I was like, "You are in my acknowledgements. Can I ask you a question?" So yes, that's, for me, that's a very enjoyable thing. And even when I was working with my research assistant, I came to him and I said, "Can you talk to me about, like, were there, there's this puppet show in Don Quixote, like, what was this story about puppets?" And he was like, "I have a friend who literally just wrote about puppets and marionettes. And that was her thesis. Would you like to read it?" And I was, "Yes, absolutely." And that became a major set piece in the book.
So all of that plus have a lot of friends.
Have a lot of friends. Which, as a complete introvert, I can't believe I'm giving that advice. But be a fan of things. Be a fan of things. That's how I met John. We met at a Game of Thrones party. Yes, I am a nerd. And we met years ago at a Brotherhood Without Banners party. But when you're passionate about stuff, when you're a fan of stuff, that shared passion is like, it's powerful, and people get excited to talk about the things that they love.
Another question over here.
Hi, Leigh. In his book, one of the former hostages in Gaza writes about how a group of hostages that he was held with found a copy of your book, Shadow and Bone. They read it over and over. Apparently meant a lot to them, and they said when they get out, they're going to contact you and tell you how much the book meant to them. I was just wondering, were you aware of this? And if you can share, have you heard from them? And just what is it like to be part of people's history in this way and make such an impact in, my guess is, a very unexpected way?
I mean, for me, it was a wildly emotional thing to learn about. I have spoken to a number of them. I don't talk about it publicly because it's their story, it's not mine. And I think for me, it's just a testimony to the fact that stories are universal. And I hope that in the future there'll be the thing that helps to bring us together. So it really could have been any book, so it doesn't feel like, it has nothing to do with me in many ways, but to know, the thing about becoming a writer is, and that I didn't anticipate, is that your books go places you never could. And they reach people who you will never meet. And then you have these moments here in this room where you get to look into the faces of people who have shared those stories with you, and those quiet moments and that struggle with you. And to me, that was the unexpected thing. I was a shy kid, a weird kid, a lonely kid. And to now be united with so many people, and to be able to talk about stories with them, and then to have this moment that connects me to these people I've never met and may never meet, is a very powerful one.
I'm a huge fan, so sorry if I'm fangirling a little bit.
Please,
but
I need your praise to live.
Yeah, don't let me. I'll be here all day. But more of a surface level question.
Please.
I'm reading The Familiar. How do you decide which books have maps or pronunciation guides or dictionary pieces? Like, I'm learning a lot of new words, which is great for my brain, but I was just curious.
I mean, in some ways, that's the choice of the publisher. I certainly, when we published Shadow and Bone, I was very excited to get a map. Because I'm a fantasy reader and oh my gosh, I have a map. And then the problem is you write later books and you're like, wow, I really can't move that mountain range because it's on the map. With Ninth House, I really, Yale and New Haven are characters effectively in the book, and so I wanted people, first of all, I wanted to show off and be like, everything is real in this book. I researched the heck out of it. And so I wanted people to be able to know that and then to be able to visit those places, although I made sure not to put anybody's actual home on that map. And then I think with The Familiar, I think in the Spanish edition there is a map of Madrid in it. But my thought was, first of all, a lot of these places have moved, like La Casilla, which is the country estate. Well, that country estate is now in central Madrid because the city expanded so much. And in fact, the building is not really even the building anymore. So that presented a sort of tricky possibility. I guess we should have maybe had a glossary, but we didn't. Sorry. Okay, good. Duolingo. Well, also with Ladino, like I actually wrote to somebody. I was actually looking for more refranes, and then she worked at the University of Washington Sephardic Studies program, and so she actually ended up being the guide on pronunciation for Ladino for the audiobook and also for the spellings as well, because it's a language of diaspora, like there's a lot of different spellings, and now there's a codified spelling, which I did not actually realize. Yeah.
So Peter, this is going to be our last question.
Okay. Oh, we'll do these two, because I waved to her, so let's do two. Okay. Sorry. I can't be controlled.
Is this on? Can you hear me? That's too much pressure to be last anyway. So,
that's right.
Earlier you mentioned using Scrivener, I believe, to help put your stories together. I'm wondering, is there any other technology or tools that you use in either the creative process or further along?
I mean, my general philosophy is whatever gets you there. So whiteboard, notes, script, but there's no other apps or programs that I really use. I use Word and I use Scrivener. I always have a new notebook for everything. And I will tell you, when I was writing Six of Crows, I put everything into Google Calendar. And I did it many years ahead because I was just looking for a blank slate. And so then several years later, I started getting notifications like Jesper and Rylan are on the roof. And I was like, oh, okay. So again, whatever gets you there. And I will pivot between things too. Like if something isn't working when you're typing, go write longhand, right? If longhand isn't working, have a conversation with yourself. If that's not working, bring out the whiteboard. And I always think of that meme with the guy with the, like, and I'm like, that's me when I'm working on a book, just being like, it all makes sense. Yes.
My name is Gianna. I'm an illustrator. Speaking of fantasy maps, one of the things I've always really appreciated about your writing, besides the prose and world building, is how you integrate visual aids into your books. And of course, I was really excited to hear about your upcoming children's books because I want to be going into children's illustration. So I'd love to hear a bit more about the process with collaborating with different artists, especially because I know in the Grishaverse there was a Darkland graphic novel that was released as well. So anything you could tell me about that would just be an absolute dream come true.
I mean, I am a visual person in the sense that I know what I like when I see it, but boy, do I not know how to describe it. And aesthetics are sort of really important to me in my life and also in my work. I will say that when I write, I think if you're having trouble describing things visually as a writer, again, making friends with artists, learning their process can help. I always say if you want to know how to talk about food, listen to people who know about food, right? Watch a lot of Chopped. It's actually very effective. But there are ways that I collaborate where I keep a huge file of artists whose work I like. And sometimes I will see somebody's work and I will say, and I will base a project essentially on, or a pre-order print or whatever it is on, because I like their work so much and I just want to work with them. And I think playing to those artists' strengths and respecting what they bring to the table is a big part of it. If you put Invisible Parade next to Demon in the Wood graphic novel, next to Better Pets, these are three radically different projects. And sometimes I know people want to see the same thing again and again. I don't. I want to be surprised. I want to be surprised by the people I'm working with, and I think that's the best part of the process to me. So I think find the people whose work you love and approach them. Tell them that you love their stuff. I mean, I don't care how famous or successful someone has gotten. You can never hear, I really liked what you did there, enough. It means so much. And you must know, I think, okay, how many writers have we gotten here? Writers, artists? Okay, there's a lot. Again, a lot of competition coming up. You know what that praise means. And the only thing I will say is, and I said this in my TED Talk, so I'm going to say it here too. We live in a time where we have confused the reward of creating, which is its own thing, with the reward of being praised for creating. So keep your people close, stay away from AI, and do not shirk, do not turn away from the discomfort and challenges of creation. It is the best part of the gig, and it's what brings us together, writers, artists, readers. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming to the Savannah Book Festival.
We thank you for being part of the book festival. We have a little gift for you on behalf of the board of directors. It's a token of our appreciation, a copy of Savannah Square by Square. Just to remind everybody, she'll be signing down here in front of the stage, just one book per person and a maximum of 200. Thanks everybody for coming out. Keep reading. We'll see you next year.